Coming up on a special Tuesday episode of Why Should I Trust You? We're heading out to the farm today. We brought together a group of farmers, writers, and advocates, some aligned with the MAHA movement, some not so aligned, to talk about how we grow and harvest our food. Is modern agriculture a gift to the world, a driver of our poor health, or maybe a bit of both? With pesticides such a hot issue for many of the MAHA faithful, you are not going to want to miss what this group has to say about that and so much more. Let's get started. Hey, welcome. Happy Tuesday.
Yeah, welcome everybody.
Welcome.
Yeah, it's great to be with you all today. And full disclosure, we're taping this on Monday, but when you hear this, it'll be Tuesday. We are really excited about this episode. It's one we've been wanting to do for some time now, and it's a little bit off of our typical public health stuff. We often talk about vaccines and ultra-processed foods and trust in doctors and medicine, and then there's how we farm our food. And I'm going to be honest with you, guys. I think it's something I didn't really think a ton about until I've just been hearing it surfaced in so many conversations as a result of the Make America Healthy Again movement and just them talking about the big changes that are needed in order to restore America's health. But it has made me wonder, what are the facts about some of this stuff and what do I need to know? And before we get into all that, who are we? I'm Brinda Adhikari.
I'm Tom Johnson.
And I'm Maggie Bartlett.
Yeah, Brinda and I are journalists. Maggie's a virologist with Johns Hopkins, and Dr. Mark is off today, but you'll hear him back on our next episode.
He won't be Farmer Mark. He'll be Dr. Mark on the next episode. So look, as we said, we brought together a group today that all in one way or another share a common theme. They're interested in topics involving farming and agriculture, but they don't always see eye to eye on what needs to change about the way we farm or whether there needs to be changes at all, or maybe don't agree on what kinds of changes our future could have in store. Tom, just kind of set the table for us here. Do you see what I did there? Set the table.
Set the table.
Food.
Boy.
Oh my goodness. What do we need to know about this topic about farming, agriculture, before we bring in our guests?
Yeah. And this, as we said, we're going to get to that conversation in a moment, but it's such a complicated, big, rich topic. It's sort of hard to know where to begin, but we thought we'd begin back in the 1960s. This was a time when American agriculture was really the envy of the world, super modern, super efficient, much like it is today. But in 1962, a book comes out called Silent Spring, and this is by the biologist Rachel Carson.
It was legendary.
Legendary. Really transformative. It sort of opens Americans' eyes to pesticides as a tool of modern agriculture. She, zeroed in on DDT. And she wrote, for the first time in the history of the world, every human being is now subjected to contact with dangerous chemicals from the moment of conception until death. And, people kind of woke up. One American who was moved by the author appears to have been Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So RFK Jr. has recounted that when he was a boy, his uncle, the president, and his parents invited Carson to dinner. And RFK Jr. is quoted as saying, "They invited Rachel Carson to dinner at my house at Hickory Hill, and it was one of the great thrills of my life to meet her. And my uncle went to bat for her." So RFK Jr. would, of course, go on to become an environmental lawyer and a leader, clashing with polluters in court. And when he ran for president, he continued his crusade against pesticides such as glyphosate, which is the most commonly used herbicide on American farms. So flash forward to last week, and we have RFK Jr. at the helm of HHS, and that big MAHA Commission strategy report comes out. And this is the one that has recommendations for how we're going to make American children healthier. And the report says when it comes to pesticides, the government should, quote, ensure that the public has awareness and confidence in EPA's robust review procedures. So the report called for more targeted use of pesticides, so less will be used, and to study our exposure to them more comprehensively. But it did not say anything about new regulations to limit farmers' use of pesticides. I thought that was surprising. I think a lot in MAHA thought that was surprising.
Yeah, I mean, look, the report as a whole, I think most of them were quite happy with. I noticed some comments from people like Zen Honeycutt, who is a big grassroots organizer for MAHA, who felt like this was just a big fat kiss to industry. I can't imagine that if pesticides is like your issue and you look at the way it was drafted in that report, that you're super psyched about how how they're going to move forward on this. And in fact, the conversation you'll see is even just hearing Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s own words about it, just from like less than a year ago to what was in that report, it's really pretty striking how much maybe he's had to change his tune a little bit to meet with whatever demands EPA and USDA and President Trump are making. So I think that's what kind of struck me.
Yeah, I think it's so right. It's even that first report back in spring where MAHA laid out sort of the drivers of poor health in kids. Pesticides, chemicals were in there. This is a really rough year for the farming community in America. They are taking a hit economically. The trade war with China, which is a major market for American farm goods. And I think, there was over this summer a lot of discussion about that commission report and a lot of groups saying, hey, you, Commission, have to get this right about farming. This is a critical aspect of the American economy, and we can't go sort of saying farmers are the cause of our sickness when farmers are growing the food that America needs to sustain itself. So, Maggie, do you want to talk specifically about the EPA and that review process that the report said we have to do a better job of explaining to people?
Yeah, it's really the EPA's job to ensure that pesticides are being used at levels it considers safe to humans. And then it's the FDA's job to test and make sure that the produce that's moving from our farms to our supermarkets is under that level. And a recent FDA report stated that just under like half of the US grown crops tested by the FDA had detectable pesticide residues on them. And of that half that had pesticide residue, 96% had levels below the federal safety threshold.
Yeah.
But you looked into a little bit more specifics.
Yeah, there was one study that found, looking at data from 2013 to 2014, that an estimated 81% of the U.S. population had exposure to glyphosate. So the authors said, quote, the presence of glyphosate in a person's urine indicates exposure, but they were clear to say it does not by itself mean that the chemical causes disease or an adverse effect. So stepping back, the EPA considers glyphosate as, quote, not likely to be carcinogenic to humans. And then there's another big study analysis that a lot of people point to, which is out of the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is a research arm of the World Health Organization. That group has classified glyphosate as, quote, probably carcinogenic to humans.
Tom, I was going to jump in and just say, like, I think this also, this kind of like, one group is saying one thing and the other group is pushing back and saying it is carcinogenic. I think it talks to a lot of just the real, like the complexity in science around toxins and toxic exposures and environmental exposures. I mean, the sort of button down proof that something causes something, my understanding from just scientists I've spoken to, can be really difficult in this space, and that there are safe thresholds that, different federal agencies try to provide as a way for us at home to feel like, okay, well, if I eat this apple, it's not going to kill me kind of thing. But at the same time, as you'll see in this conversation, there have been lawsuits against these massive multinational companies, successful lawsuits resulting in huge payouts to people who have said that, their exposure to these chemicals have resulted in major health complications for them. So it's a real kind of a tough nut to crack, but we think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, it's tough. All sides have the data that they point to. And, it's hard to sort of, as a consumer, to really kind of make heads or tails of this. But back to the MAHA report on how to make American children healthier, you mentioned Zen Honeycutt, who's, of course, the founder of Moms Across America and a big leader of the MAHA movement. She said about this report's recommendation to do more to show the public that, quote, the EPA has robust review procedures on pesticides was a pathetic attempt to assuage the American people. So not happy with that report.
Yeah, that is interesting from Zen. And when we come back, we want to talk to you a little bit about the group that we just spoke with. So we'll be right back. Okay, Okay, so guys, we want to introduce you to who was on this call. There were 5 people on the call. Stephanie Nash, a 4th-generation dairy farmer who lives and works in Tennessee. We had John Clark. He's been on the show before. He operates a small farm in Vermont, and he's one of the authors of the MAHA Report, which is a popular newsletter. And John's a big supporter of Secretary Kennedy. We had Aaron Martin, who founded Fresh RX Oklahoma, which prescribes local, regeneratively grown food to reverse food-linked chronic disease, nutrition-linked chronic disease in Oklahoma. And she has also frequently been aligned with much of the MAHA movement's agenda. We had Michelle Miller, who's a very popular presence on social media. You might know her as the Farm Babe. She is a former corn and soybean farmer who shines a light on the modern just farming and agricultural policy. And finally, we had Michael Grunwald, who is a journalist focused on the climate, agriculture, and author of a new book called We Are Eating the Earth, The Race to Fix Our Food System and Save Our Climate. His writing can be found from everywhere, from the New York Times to Politico to Time Magazine. It was a super lively conversation. These guys definitely did not hold back. And so here it is. Take a listen. I want to play for you something that Secretary Kennedy said before he became HHS secretary, right before the election, in fact, although it was right after he had endorsed then candidate Trump. And this was last fall. And he said this outside the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. And I'd love to play this for you and then kind of ask you what you hear. I may call on 1 or 2 of you, and then we can kind of get it going. So just here we go.
America's current ag policy is destroying America's health on every level. It's destroying the economic health of farmers by forcing them to get big or get out. Big corporate farms do just fine, while the small and medium family operators are squeezed to the point of collapse. It also destroys the health of America's soil and water by tilting the playing field in favor of more chemicals, more herbicides, more insecticides, more concentrated monocrops and feedlots. And finally, it destroys the health of consumers.
All right, so I'm going to go first to Farmer Michelle, the Farm Babe. Can you just give me your sense of what you heard in that clip?
Oh, gosh. There's a lot to unpack there. Oh, my God. So first of all, any farmer can do a great job regardless of size or label. And so to think that we are destroying our soil is completely counterintuitive to what a farmer's business model would be. If we are using more pesticides and more fertilizers, then we would go broke. Like, we have to use as few as possible, and that's just good business sense. So one thing that drives me crazy is when he talks about these big corporate farms. First of all, in the United States, 97% of farms are family farms. And a lot of times farms get bigger because they're good business people. And so, for example, I can look at, when I was farming, and a lot of farms were going under because they weren't good business people. And so when they were selling, because they had a good year and they went out and bought a new house and a new truck and a new boat and all this stuff. And then you have to be good at business, because in agriculture, the economies are always going up and down and up and down. You have a good year, you have a terrible year. You have to save, you have to be business savvy. You have to be financially fit to weather the storm when things do not go well. And so, do I support all different farms of all shapes and sizes? Absolutely. Is there some truth to squeezing out the small and mid-scale farms? Absolutely. But the big farms can struggle just as bad as the small, or vice versa. Any farm can be profitable or devastated regardless of size. But I think you would find technology has improved every aspect of our lives, and agriculture is no exception to that. So now with modern seed genetics, we're working on improving plants to where we can eliminate or reduce pesticide use. So like GMOs, for example, they've allowed us to eliminate a lot of pesticide sprays. On our farm growing GMO crops, we would only spray herbicides 1 day a year, or maybe 2 in the beginning part of the growing season. And so there's this notion that we're out there just destroying our soil, when the opposite is true. Especially now with data, we have access to hundreds of different data points to our soil that tells us exactly what nutrients we need, what we have, what we don't have. And so we're continuing to do more with less. And do we want to see more family farms and keep them alive? Absolutely. But I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that commodity prices are down and input costs are up.
John Clark, why don't we go to you next? What did you hear in that clip? And do you agree with the fact about what he was saying about soil and chemicals?
So I'm listening to everything Michelle said, which also packed a lot into a complex issue. And so I want to be careful to note where I agree as well as where I might take exception. And where I might take exception is the idea that technology is always bettering us. And technologies often create new problems for us. And so I want to emphasize an agreement. I am not out to vilify large farms, but I think we often do incentivize practices that are not good. I question the entire ethanol program. I question if we need as much corn much corn cropping as we have. But what Kennedy was speaking to, that I heard Michelle agree, is that we have favored the large over the small. He was referencing Earl Butt's command that, get big or get out. Here in Vermont, we had 27,000 dairy farms in 1929. We have about 550 now. The land prices are high. We've consolidated the farms. Yes, that's more efficient. Yes, that's produces cheaper food for people, but it destroys rural cultures. It creates a dependency. We're shipping food from further and further away, or farther and farther away. We're importing more and more food, including from China. We're using paraquat, not widely, but it's manufactured in China where it's banned and sold here. So it's not a one size fits all, but the idea that we can replace cows and their manure, as the climate people say, cows are so bad for their flatulence. We must save ourselves from the cows. They don't go after lawn mowing. They don't go after golf carts. They don't go after skiers. They go after farmers. And it's a lie. So I think that because we have, and I wrote a book about this called Small Farm Republic, in which I advocated for conservatives to lead on the environment by supporting farming, agriculture, food supplies, et cetera. So for me, MAHA is kind of a dream come true. For many of us, it is. But I'm kind of one of the lone conservatives, and ultimately I'm really a libertarian along with Joel Salatin. Now, if you go to Joel Salatin's farm and look at his regenerative practices, which we have to get into what that term even means because it's abused and it's gray and that's its own discussion, but you can see the difference between his soils and their ability to retain water in his neighbors. The underlying issue I think that Kennedy is talking about is an over-reliance on chemical inputs. Not that we should do away with them all. And the recent MAHA report, a commission report, nobody's coming after the fertilizers. We want to support those farmers that are using them with incentives. For instance, if you're a conventional farmer and the government paid you instead of subsidies to grow more corn for ethanol, but gave you money to put some of that corn, the corn cropping land, back into rotationally grazed cows, for instance, for which there's a huge market, both foreign and domestic, that's a win-win. So I'm often looking at policies that can improve soil health because our prairies were built by bison. Cows are good. They are not defined by their burps only, which is actually where 95% of their supposed gases. Of course, their manure, if it's properly stewarded, sequesters far more carbon dioxide and methane than they ever emit. So that's a whole scam. Anyway, I think we would all agree on that. Right. So that's where some of us are. And frankly, I've found myself quite attacked as trying to aspire towards organics. And that years ago led me to sort of counter and get aggressive towards conventional. And that's both counterproductive and not fair. We have paid conventional farmers to use the practices that they're using. If we pay them to use more, not to go, extreme like Sri Lanka, but if we pay them and support them, because something else Michelle said is absolutely correct. Market commodity prices are down and inputs are up, and we all lose. And I think there is some policy history behind that as well that favors chemical manufacturers over the farmers themselves.
Right before I go back to Michelle, I'd love to bring Mike in first and get your kind of thoughts to what John is saying. And then Michelle, I'd love to bring you in as well.
Well, I suspect John and I are going to throw down a little bit over this. I think I've seen he's taken some whacks at me online, but let me start by saying something that we heartily agree about, which is ethanol, which I write about in my book about what ecological and just government, lunacy catastrophe it has been. Again, I come at this from mostly from environmental issues, and ethanol is eating the earth, right? It's eating about a Texas worth of the earth. Now, livestock are eating 50 Texas's worth of the earth, and agriculture generally is eating 75 Texas's worth of the earth. One of the things I think we have to think about when we look at both agrochemicals and agricultural generally is that agriculture's biggest job over the next 30 years is going to be to make more food than it's made in the last 12,000 years. And we can talk about some of the undeniable downsides of pesticides, herbicides, synthetic fertilizers. But one thing about fertilizers is that they do help crops grow. And one thing about pesticides is that they do kill pests that stop crops from growing. And again, we are going to have to make a lot more food with a lot less land and a lot fewer emissions. That's going to be really hard, right? John mentioned Sri Lanka, right? They did, and again, that is an extreme case, but they banned agrochemicals. Their yields crashed. They had food shortages, food riots. The government fell. The president had to flee. This is sort of not definitely not the model for the world when we're thinking about how we can help farmers essentially make even more food with less of a mess. Often, I do think to quickly deal with some of these nutrition issues, I think some of those are sort of overblown when it comes to how food is grown. You see a lot these kind of big fights that Bobby Kennedy is picking over the difference between seed oils and beef tallow, or high fructose corn syrup and sugar. I mean, high fructose corn syrup and sugar are both really bad for you. You shouldn't have too much of it in either form. And even if you want high fructose corn syrup, whether it's grown organically or grown with GMO corn, it's still not going to be really, really great for you. The question is sort of, if you're eating Doritos, and you're eating crap, that's crap. How it's grown is not necessarily the source of that crop. You can turn a soybean into edamame, or you can, sort of feed it to a chicken, or you can, put it into to some kind of, nasty corn chip that, the nutrition people are going to shake their fingers about. So I do think when we think about agriculture, we have to think about what we're asking of it. And the main thing we're asking of it is to feed the world, right? There are going to be nearly 10 billion of us in 2050. We're going to need 50% more calories. We can't keep using land. Agriculture is already 2 of every 5 acres of land on this planet. This was we talk about cities and suburbs. That's like 1 heading towards 2%. So agricultural sprawl is way bigger than urban sprawl. And really, our natural planet is becoming an agricultural planet. And that is the it's the leading driver of biodiversity loss, of deforestation, water pollution. It uses 70% of our fresh water, and it is now a third of our climate problem. Not so much because of the burps and farts that John mentioned, although they're an issue too, but it's mostly because of land use. And it is a fact that an American dairy cow, it makes 25 times as much milk as an Indian dairy cow. And that means it's eating about 1/25 as much of the earth. And so these are really, efficiency has become this kind of dirty word, right? It sort of evokes these kind of evil, rapacious corporate farmers dredging dollars out of the dirt. But efficiency is going to be really important. And it's something that, RFK Jr. has really kind of scoffed at. He's sort of suggested that using chemicals and being efficient, and sometimes, yes, achieving economies of scale, that this is sort of this is the sort of real disaster, not just the nutritional disaster, but an environmental disaster. This kind of intensification of farming has sort of lost our way and poisoned our soils. But really, the environmental disaster of agriculture And again, I'm not blaming farmers because we need to eat, but it's the transformation of nature into agriculture that's when we lose the biodiversity. That's when we lose the carbon. So I think to the extent that we focus on, we need to make everything organic. We need to make everything, we need to make our farms as much like nature as possible. If it's making less food per acre, it's using more acres to make food, and that means it's eating more of the earth.
Michelle, you wanted to jump in. I just also want to point you to the opening part of that clip from RFK of a year ago, where he said, America's current ag policy is destroying America's health on every level. Is that an accurate description, point of view?
Yeah. So as somebody who actually farmed corn and soybeans for many years, there's a few myths I'd like to address, which is people believe that we are getting direct pay subsidies. People believe that we are being paid to grow these crops. That's not true. Direct pay subsidies ended over a year or over a decade ago. Now the only programs that we maybe have access to is some cost share programs for the very conservation programs we all want. So we can get cost share programs for cover crops, for no-till farming practices, for conservation programs. So actually there is a lot of incentives for us to turn this part of our farms into conservation. So that's a big myth.
And Stephanie, you're nodding. That's that's the message you want to send too?
Not a thing. It's the biggest argument that I get on national news all the time. That's why I have not been invited back to some outlets, because they start to push me in a conversation that the government is paying us to do this, and this word is better than this. And it really puts a fire under my soul, because not only did I come from the largest agriculture county in the United States, and my dad fought for years and worked for California agriculture for years, but now I'm the voice, and I'm only 32 years old, and I decided to go into the dairy industry, which is a dying industry. So if you look at people like me that are really trying to advocate truthfully to keep farmers and ranchers in America, keep our food here, and also agree with others, I think they have turned us against each other. And I know Michelle has a lot to say about that, but I'm so sick and tired of us having to fight each other. And then people like Kennedy coming in and using words, but not giving true context. You can have a headline in the news and all these consumers freak out because they don't know the truth behind that headline. We have to educate for that headline. So yes, you have people fighting for us in Washington, D.C., but if you put a headline out there and then you're only hearing from people in Washington, D.C. instead of the farmer rancher, what do you think consumers are going to do? They go into panic mode. They start Googling things. And so that's the biggest thing I think that I would take away from this conversation. You could say every word under the sun that sounds magical and happy, but consumers truly don't know what you're talking about. You have to give more context. You have to give education. And on top of education, you have to give the point of view from a farmer rancher in Montana and California and New York, because we don't all farm the same.
Is there a headline, Stephanie, that, just to go back to your point about RFK, can make a headline and people will hear it and consumers will hear it, and the context from the farmers is not breaking through? Is there a headline recently that you've heard that has angered you?
I mean, on the subject of pesticides, there's been a lot of taking certain ingredients out of our food and not giving much context there. But the one that will always stick with me, it was years ago, is Meet the People That Kill Our Planet by the New York Times. It was a disgusting article that was brought out to pretty much put us as agriculture that raise livestock, saying that we are killing the planet. That was one of the worst articles that I've read. And it made people believe that animals are bad for the planet and that farmers and ranchers are not doing a good job.
All right, Michelle, sorry, I just had to break Stephanie in because she was nodding.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm glad you did. That was great, Stephanie. I'm really glad. When I saw your name on the panel today, I was like, awesome, because I know you share the same passion and understanding that I do. And that is what I think Stephanie and I have a shared passion about, is farmers are 1% of the population. And it feels like everybody gets asked about what we do except for us. And it's like, hello, corn and soybean farmers, we're real people and we're not out to hurt you or destroy the planet. Now, getting back to the point, the government does not pay us to grow these crops. The only part of funding that we can get, like I said, is for conservation programs and also for possibly some crop insurance. Because if we lose our farm, right? We got destroyed by a tornado in Iowa a few years ago, and it was pretty catastrophic. And so, if you look at we have to protect our food supply. So when crop insurance comes into play, they do help offset those costs for us. Thank God, because as it stands right now, I just talked to a farmer yesterday. He's set to lose $750,000 this year. If you read the comment section on my Farm Babe Facebook page just yesterday, people, I mean, it's a really, really dark time for agriculture. We are absolutely in a state of emergency. But sometimes people ask me, well, why don't you just grow something else? And the answer is it's not that simple, because in Iowa, we're only set up for corn and soybean infrastructure. If we wanted to grow a different crop, we don't have a place to sell it. We don't have a place to truck it, to sell it, unless we want to sell it all across the country, which adds up. Again, we've got millions of dollars held up in equipment, in knowledge, in our combines, and our tractors. Like, we've got millions of dollars sitting on our farms. So to just be like, why don't you just grow something else? And the other thing is competing with foreign imports and exports. So like, we used to be one of the biggest oat buyers in the Midwest for Quaker Oats. Our farm was located 2 hours away from Quaker Oats. And literally we were buying oats from all over the Midwest. And then Quaker Oats decided to start getting them from Canada instead, because they could get it for much cheaper. It ultimately killed the oat industry in Iowa, which is really sad, because they're literally in our backyard. But again, these corporations, that is where I think we can all agree, is corporations and government just caring about the dollar. And so the farmers are left in limbo, because we're like, well, this is what we can grow. This is all we know. This is what we've done. This is, you know what I mean? And so it's the risk and the reward of what else can we do? And lastly, ethanol. Do I agree that we should be eating less junk food? Absolutely. Is corn overgrown? Do we produce too much? Yeah, absolutely. Do I want to make America healthy again? Absolutely. 85% of the food on grocery store shelves right now is junk food, and I will not advocate for that. Even as a corn and soybean grower, I believe to make America healthy again, we need to eat more fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, things like that. That's like eat from the earth. Absolutely. But also ethanol, as somebody that used to sell it to corn ethanol plants, we don't get just ethanol from that corn. Part of that kernel of corn goes to ethanol. Another part of it goes to distillers' grains for like alcohol. And another part of it goes to another type of distiller for pet food and livestock feed. And another part of it goes to highway salt. Another part of it, the steam is captured off the top of ethanol plants, and that's used for dry ice on highways. And so I think sometimes people think it's just ethanol, and there's actually hundreds of byproducts. Like corn and soybeans go into like 5,000 products that we use every day. Everything from tires to fireworks to textiles to, plastics. Everything. I could make a laundry list. Yeah, corn and soybeans are not the best crop, but they do feed a shit ton of pets and livestock and people. Mm-hmm. And junk food, as much as I don't want to be like, yay, junk food, it's an affordable calorie meal with a long shelf life that feeds millions of people. And we can't continue to have this first world elitism when not everybody has access to that.
Mike, do you want to respond to anything Michelle just said specifically about corn and ethanol?
It's funny because I don't think she should, I think corn and soy are great. They're efficient crops. And, you see in Brazil, there's they talk about a soy moratorium because there is some deforestation associated with soy. But then they'll replace soy with less efficient crops that'll take more of the Amazon. The problem with ethanol is just yes, it's, there is the DDG, there are other byproducts, whatever you do with corn has byproducts. But when you grow fuel instead of food, you need more acreage to replace the food. And that acreage is not going to come from a parking lot or from it's going to be a forest or a wetland somewhere on the planet. And ethanol is true. Even when you take into account the byproducts, it's about twice as bad for the climate as gasoline. And it's just, now they're talking about putting this stuff in planes to grow 25% of the world's aviation fuel from crops would require 40% of the world's farmland, of the world's cropland. And, again, we're on track to deforest another dozen Californias by 2050. And we just don't have another dozen Californias worth of forest to spare.
If I could add to that, too, we have to remember, why are we deforesting? It's because of urban sprawl. So as it stands, we're losing three. Well, we're losing three. Well, we're losing 3 acres of farmland every minute to urban development. Just think about all of your hometowns, all of the cities, they've all exploded in growth. So as we're putting cement over farmland, you can't get that farmland back. So
again, but cities and suburbs are 1% of our land. agriculture is 40% of our land. We lose an acre of tropical forest to agriculture every 6 seconds. So just the agricultural sprawl issue. And again, it's not, I mean, this makes it sound like, oh, farmers are terrible. They're not doing it because they like cutting down trees. They're doing it because we need to eat.
Yeah.
And again, so I'm not pointing fingers, but I do think also this idea that like, we also have to have mature conversations with farmers because many of them really do care a lot about their land, and they want to be good stewards of their land. But we also have to say that collectively they're stewarding a mess, and we have to think about how we can help them make even more food, but with less mess.
Let me bring in Farmer Stephanie Nash, and then Aaron, I am bringing you into this conversation. Go ahead, Stephanie.
I will be super quick. I live in Tennessee, and so to say that farmers are deforesting our land is absolutely untrue. I live in Franklin, Tennessee. It's one of the largest growing areas in America, and I'm actually fighting against the state of how much development has come into our state. That's why I have to get off soon, because I'm meeting with a farmer that has over 800 acres that does not want to sell to housing developments, so we can put that in a program for future farmers of America. That's the thing that we should be doing. So I do not agree with that. I think housing developments have taken over our land, but just to get into the
That's just in the U.S. You mean in the U.S.? You mean, right?
In the
I mean,
US,
obviously,
yes,
because we
absolutely.
deforested our Amazon 100 years ago.
Yes,
So now
US, yeah.
now we're just outsourcing our deforestation to the developing world and the global South. But I totally agree with you about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. We've got no more. We've already deforested our forests for agriculture.
And I'm
Indiana
curious
used to
'cause-
be 85% forest.
And I know Erin will appreciate this, I think, because with her background. So the biggest thing that I want people to know as well is I'm really against the fake milk and fake meat markets. I think they have come into our market and absolutely, first of all, been spreading rumors about what agriculture does. I think that we should be protecting our market as agriculture, and it comes from a farm and ranch. It does not come out of laboratory. And so I believe in the movement of MAHA. That should be one of their first initiatives, is to do what Europe did and make it a barista drink or make it an alternative, because that's what it is. It's only an alternative. It is not a part of the agriculture market. And so as we're on this healthy food movement and how we're having a conversation, that's just, I feel like people should know that it's not part of agriculture.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. Aaron, I want to bring you in. This is, first of all, I so appreciate the passion on this call, and it's so interesting to listen to. Aaron, obviously emotions run high on this topic, and I want you to sort of, just going back to what Kennedy said at that very beginning, do you see a world in which some of these divides can be bridged despite feeling pretty differently about say, pesticides, and maybe even take it from the pesticide issue, which is a very divisive issue in this country? How do you react to what he said, and where do you see that conversation moving forward?
Yeah, I think there's so many misunderstandings, and most of us actually agree. I think a lot of young people want to get into farming, and a lot of farmers want to do better, but there's not a runway for them to do that. And we've really lost a lot of mid-scale farmers. Most policies and lobby groups are really just representing large conglomerates of farmers. We need to keep food here. We do need cattle. We need to be doing high density grazing. We can get a lot more with a lot less land, which kind of goes back to Mike's point. There's been a myth fed to farmers that we need to feed the world. Last year, there was a guy who did the most bushels of corn per acre, and he was a regenerative farmer. Now, some people would say he's not a regenerative farmer because he does use some pesticides. But I think the problem is we can't go from 0 to 1. There has to be a transition period, and a lot of farmers want to maybe transition to healthier practices, but there's no runway for them. There's like a 4 to 6 year period where they need to kind of get over this hump, and then they can start making more money, but there's no support for them in the interim. And so I'm really excited that there will be some new programs being announced from the Conservation Service that could help these farmers do that. It's not fair to put it on the farmers. The farmers have been doing what they've been incentivized to do and been told to do, and it's really not their fault. I think that we absolutely need to be focused more on soil health. our plants and animals will be more disease resistant. We won't have to use as many inputs. I do think farmers are trying to be better because like Michelle was saying, they can't afford to use more inputs. And that's actually what's driving a lot of farmers to transition. And so there's just so many misnomers, and to talk directly to the farmers is really important. I really wanted to actually come back to Michelle and Stephanie to kind of define this "we don't get crop subsidies," because I think I'm a little confused about that. And I think that's something that people absolutely think, like when you just like look up on ChatGPT, what does the Farm Bill subsidize? It clearly states that there's price supports or direct payments for corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, rice, sorghum, peanuts, and some dairy and sugar. Could you all talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that would be really helpful to understand, like, it maybe not subsidized in the way people think, or just help me understand that a bit more, because that's definitely something people truly believe.
Farmer Stephanie, by the way, if you don't like me calling you like farmer, whatever, I don't have to, but Stephanie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, trying to figure out where to start. So I'm a dairy farmer. So we do also grow corn and wheat, but mainly we have about 2,700 animals and we milk 1,200 twice a day. So there are programs like the Milk Share program, and it varies per state. I have a farmer friend that's in Idaho that is part of a Milk Share program that if it fluctuates from month to month, they can get some money back for a price being lower than it was last month. And so far. But when you're talking about specific subsidies, getting money from the government, that doesn't happen. What we can apply for is grants through the state. That's what we have done in the past. So we have gotten a grant for a new silo. We have got a grant to fix our calf barn. And that is money given to us through a program that we go online, we fill out, we say our needs, and then we can pretty much apply for that program from the state. So there are programs like that for dairy farmers, but we're not getting money from the government because we didn't make this last year, or because last year we had a field that was supposed to produce 22 yield and it had 9 yield. We can't just ask for money. It's not there. So I don't know what else Michelle wants to say about crops, but for dairy farming,
and I guess, Michelle,
programs.
Putting dairy aside, are we saying on this call that corn farmers in the United States don't get government subsidies? That's
Not that I know of. I mean, we grew corn and soybeans for many years. My ex, who I farmed with, was a 6th-generation farmer. There used to be. We have to remember, we don't even have a farm bill right now. There's still a lot of uncertainties going on. So, as of right now, I'm not saying they didn't used to exist. I'm just saying as of now, and it's the myths that I can't stand the EWG. The Environmental Working Group is one of the biggest sources of disinformation out there that puts out so much disinformation. They want it to make it sound and that's probably the source of this nonsense misinformation that wants to make it sound like we're getting all this money. We're not. And by the way, Stephanie, talking about these grants, yes, some grants exist, some programs, mostly loans. The government's got to get their money. These grants are not easy for us to acquire. And the only reason why, and the cost share programs, like I mentioned, they're for conservation. So we on our farm, we added a whole conservation, nature program, wildflowers, the whole thing. We're doing these things to protect the monarchs, to bring back the bees. There's so many great things happening. We have a cost share program to do cover crops. Yeah. So are there platforms coming into place to help us be better stewards? Yes. And those stories aren't being told, which is why Stephanie and I get so fired up about this, because the disinformation doesn't stop.
Michelle, but there are absolutely gigantic farm subsidies to the big 5 commodities. As Erin said, it's corn, soy, rice, wheat, and cotton, and that's tens of billions of dollars a year. And the big beautiful bill just jacked them up even farther.
I've seen that number of $9.3 billion a year.
Well, that's just for the direct subsidies. It doesn't include crop insurance. Again, like farmers, we've talked about the important service they're providing, but they get treatment from the government that is unlike any other kind of business. And again,
the largest farms get it.
That is absolutely right.
During COVID, I will say this: dairy farmers were supposed to get money. 47% of that funding is nowhere to be found. I talked to dairy farmers across the states. Nobody got money. So
I
I will agree
agree.
with
Yeah,
you,
we're not
Michael.
talking
There's
about
money
dairy.
missing. Yeah,
And we're subsidizing more tobacco than we do actual food. And so we have food deserts all over the nation, and we have chronic disease like we've never seen. And we don't subsidize specialty crops at all. And we
That's right.
subsidize all these other crops that are making people sick. And they really are making people sick.
One of the things I'm noticing here is the conversation about direct subsidies versus insurance versus kind of these other ways in which we're providing for support. And I don't know what the answer is. And some of it is an implementation thing. I'm getting the sense from Stephanie that the money may be appropriated, but it's not actually being received. So that's something. I want to go back to the conversation about pesticides for a second, and I'll tell you why. So I'm a mom and I have 2 children. I'm somebody who's liberal coded, has voted Democrat, whatever, right? No matter how much science you show me on pesticides, there's something about them that just gives me the heebie-jeebies, right? So when I go to my farmer's market and I see that they're selling these beautiful tomatoes and they're saying that they're clean or whatever, I'm I'm going to buy those, and I'm going to feel real good about myself. I'm just being honest with you. It's an emotional conversation. I think for a lot of the MAHA folks right now, they're really digging into this section 453 of the House Appropriations Bill that would kind of put up these immunity shields for some of these pesticide makers. And I wonder first if we can go to John Clark to sort of I want to just dig into pesticides for a second and just let's put our emotions aside if we can and just really talk about what we know, what we don't know, and be honest about it. You know what I'm saying? So John, talk to me about it a little bit. What do you want the public to know about pesticides?
So what we want is good science on pesticides. And to your point, actually, something I wanted to take issue with Mike on with great civility is the argument that we somehow need pesticides and that they're effective and we need synthetic fertilizers to feed plants. Well, actually, what we need to do is feed soil. The Green Revolution model is based on giving basic nutrients to plants, and it's not true that we need pesticides. There are, Rick Clark and some other people are showing us that we can incentivize and pay and support farmers to convert their conventional lands back to regenerative, and you have more biodiversity. You have more carbon sequestration if the climate is your concern. You have less need for pesticides, maybe not eliminating them, but reducing them. There are thousands of chemicals in our ecosystem. The EPA has now identified over 12,000 PFAs. Atrazine is an endocrine disruptor. It is used in corn production. I'm trying to stay out of the politics and look at the science. But the fact is that we don't EPA does not study these. They rely on the company's studies, which are sometimes falsified. The Section 453 would actually prohibit companies in the EPA from updating their labels when they find out about new risks from these chemicals. And we are not studying the interaction of these many different chemicals together. And these are forever chemicals, meaning they stay in the ecosystem. We don't even know sometimes, and they accumulate in bodies. Children and women are particularly vulnerable. And that's why people should be erring on the side of not grass, generally recognized as safe, but show me it's healthy before you put it in my baby food, not we're going to put it in your baby food until you prove to us that it's not healthy. So the argument that we need industrial agriculture to be more efficient, which is Mike was saying, we need to use less land. That's the WEF and the globalist plan. That's the big corporations at the WEF stakeholder table, not the 500 million peasant farmers that they want to displace in the name of all being dependent on chemicals that are also, by the way, making us drain our aquifers. The soils don't retain as much water. We're draining our aquifers. This is not sustainable, and that's what sustainability means.
Let's go to Aaron, and then I'd love to bring Mike in too. Go ahead, Aaron.
I think there's a really broader idea about farming that we really don't understand, and it's not just with farming, it's really with a lot of businesses that we are really doing things in an extractive manner. And we really have messed this up. And we've done this in such an extractive manner that we have forgotten that we are stewards of the land. And there are hundreds of millions of years of technology in the soil that knows what it's supposed to do. And when we nurture the land, it gives us that land and nourishment back. When we are spraying pesticides in the way in which we do, in the amount that we do, it is killing the ability of the microbiome of the soil to translate nutrients from the soil to the food. It kills the bacteria. There's more bacteria in a spoonful than there are species on this planet. 10 years ago, we thought we knew how like maybe 5% of the soil works. Today, we know less than 1% of how it works. We think, and our egos think, that we know how to control this, that we can create these systems and these technologies to control this. And what's happening is we're truly destroying ourselves. Our soil is our soul, and we've destroyed rural economy by doing it. This is a huge problem. We're seeing this happening again in the United States. It's going to repeat itself. If we keep thinking that we can control this by genetically modifying things, there is a beautiful mathematical system that Mother Earth and that God created on this earth. And if we think that we can keep controlling it and extracting from it and not nurturing it and nurturing ourselves in the process and growing our own food, we have major problems. Major problems. This is already happening. We are destroying the translation of nutrients to our food. That's why it's insanely depleted. That's why we are insanely depleted. And this is why we are so sick. There's both problems of ultra-processed food, which we're highly subsidizing and incentivizing people to eat, and it's become way cheaper because this is what we've prioritized. And we are not eating or subsidizing or incentivizing people to eat healthy, amazing food that would heal them. People have chronic disease for a decade, and I heal them in 6 to 8 months. It happens. They can see again, they can walk again, they can love their families again, they can make more money, and they can be connected to each other. And this is what we've forgotten. And so if we keep thinking that we can keep spraying stuff at the rate that we have and try to control systems, we've got something majorly wrong with ourselves.
Hang on, just want to clarify one thing. When you say you're healing people with chronic illness with food, you're talking about food-related chronic illness, correct?
Nutrition-related disease, which is the majority of what chronic.
But not all of it. Yeah,
of
course. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you for that, Erin. Let's go to Farmer Stephanie Nash next, please.
So I just want to go over a couple things because there's a lot being said, but on my end, it really doesn't make sense for production wise. So Michelle said this earlier, we are importing a lot more food than we have ever before. And so with some of the practices that I believe that you guys believe in, it does take more land. To be able to do some of these practices. There are not many programs that are, especially for dairy and, for crops that are not giving us more money. I mean, a big one is the digesters. We have been pushed to put in digesters across our country, but we have not been incentivized to do so. So, as a dairy farmer, where is that money coming from? There are great programs, and yet I believe that our food can be healthier, and I believe that people should have affordable and safe food. But at the same time, you're asking us to produce just as much food in these programs, and I don't think you're going to reach that. I think there's a big difference between a 100-cow farm and a 50,000 dairy farm and what we are producing for the population. And so going back to land availability and health of the land, with regenerative, it seems like when you're doing rotational crops or moving cows on different facilities, and John might know more about this, you will have to have more land compared to a conventional dairy farm. Is that correct? So with the biggest thing I'm asking is there's a lot of back and forth between we want less land going into agriculture, but you need more land for some of these practices. I don't know. Michelle is waving her head, so she might think I'm trying to get it out to explain it because it's kind of contradicting itself.
We can't do it all. At the end of the day, everything has its pros and cons and a trade-off. We can't do it all. And so, I mean, to your point, like, oh God, where do I start? I get pretty, people just don't have any idea. People don't have any idea what we're spraying, when, why, and how. And so we were a family of certified pesticide applicators. So I can tell you what we're spraying. I can tell you that what we're doing now is so much safer than it used to be, so much safer. I've written a lot of articles about this over the last 11 years, trying to constantly debunk myths around pesticides. People think that we're using more. We're not. They think that we're doing worse. We're not. Pesticides today are the most targeted, softest, specific ever in history. 100 years ago, the most popular pesticides were arsenic. Look back at some of the advertisements, and this is where it comes from, is advertisements. The food industry uses fear to sell. They want you to think that GMOs are the devil and that we're spraying the shit out of our crops. That couldn't be further from the truth. Ask any farmer, ask any sugar beet or cotton grower what it was like to spray 50 years ago, and they are singing the praises. They used to spray 8 chemicals, 10, 12. Now they're down to 1 or 2 in a softer, safer dose. So I think, Stephanie, what you're trying to say is like, we want to do more, but if you want us to do more with no GMOs or no pesticides, like it ain't going to happen. Guess what? Mother Nature, she bailed on us thousands of years ago. None of our food is natural. None of it. If you look at what was natural, what God and Mother Earth or Mother Nature gave us, they were like, corn was this gross, like peaches and pears, like fruits were just full of seeds. They were disgusting. And I also have to share that there's actually only 11 commercially available GMO crops available to USA farmers today. So these non-GMO labels are crazy because these crops are all non-GMO to begin with. The only GMO crops that we have in the United States are, yes, your main commodity crops like your corn, soybean, cotton, canola, stuff like that. So it's mostly in your junk food items. Other crops, they're modified. They are modified to be better for shipping, better for storage, longer shelf life, better flavor. And scientists are working their asses off every single day to create better crops so we can use less pesticides. Because if there's anybody that wants no pesticides, it's the guy paying the bill. And you'll find that the seed companies and the chemical companies, Erin, you're spot on when you said that we know more about the soil in the last few years than we have in the last thousands of years. That's true. The amount of science that is coming out about soil health is incredible. I will be the first person to jump on that bandwagon of like, but now you see these companies, they went from chemical companies. You know what? We're going to transition into seed companies. Now we're transitioning. You go to any big agriculture trade show and you will see so many companies trying to do these what are they called, to help the microbiome in the soil. What am I trying to say? You know what I'm trying to say? The word is escaping me. What was that?
Probiotic.
Like the soil, like the soil probiotic type stuff, right? And I'm so sorry that word is, because I love it. I see it around. But there's a lot of companies jumping on that bandwagon too. And I feel like it's kind of starting to trend into like, how do you know what's good and bad? Kind of like the supplements. But like going back to food companies using fear to sell, okay? The organic, the natural industry is a $350 billion industry. It's kind of like the wellness industry. There is a lot of money to be made off of telling consumers that our fear is scary or bad. That's not true. I can tell you a story. I know a woman, she has a 5,000-acre orchard in South Carolina. She grows a lot of fruit tree crops. She employs hundreds of people. Are pesticides used? Of course. Farmers have tens of thousands of species of insects, disease, weeds. If anybody doesn't want to spray anymore, tell me how to do that, because there's a lot of pest pressure. And if you don't manage that orchard, especially orchards, that yield goes to zero. And it is our job to protect our plants the best we know how. Now, to get back to this woman who has the orchard, her swabs, everything that she does, from when that's picked till it goes to the consumer shelf, her swabs are tested for pesticide residues 13 times. Pesticide residues, if they show up, are at parts per billion, which means you need to eat thousands of sittings in a single setting in order for that to negatively impact you. And we all know to wash our produce. And the other big myth is people think, well, we just switch to regenerative and organic, all of our problems will be solved. That's another myth. Organic does not mean pesticide free. I have been to many organic farms, especially in tropical environments like Florida. I live in Florida. We have a lot of tropical crops in our state, and organic farms are spraying, sometimes weekly, because they can't keep up with the pest pressure because of the disease, and the insects are disgusting in Florida. Nothing dies. And so this idea that like going from farming in Iowa to farming in Florida, like very different things. Florida, you can rotational graze year round. In Iowa, we can't have snow-fed beef. Their food has to come from somewhere, and corn is a very efficient way to put on the pounds to keep their bodies insulated and warm during the cold winter months. So it's always a trade-off.
Michelle, thank you for that. I want to just raise one point, and Mike, I wonder if I can bring you in for this, which is, look, I find so much of what all y'all are saying convincing. Even when you're disagreeing with each other, you have conviction and you have really interesting supporting evidence and things like that. And I think the one thing that resonates with me is, we live in this capitalist economy. And when you hear about the pressures from the food lobby companies to perhaps interpret data in a way that's more favorable to those companies. I know that even a couple of days ago, you have somebody like Nicholas Kristof, who is like from the New York Times, and he's a pretty liberal guy. And he comes out with this article about paraquat and about, increase, which is an herbicide, I believe, right? Weed killer. In there, he talks about all this observational studies about, links potentially to Parkinson's and how scientists from inside the company were in fact really concerned about what some initial studies were showing about different kinds of palsies. And so, Mike, I wonder, what do we do in a situation where, it feels like there's probably some truth to all of this. And I just wonder how you can kind of help someone make these decisions, what you would say to them.
Well, it's tough. I mean, Nick's article was sort of, I think, kind of typically tortured because, there's bad pesticides are bad and good pesticides are good, right? And there's been some of that lost in that. Let me try to find some common, since, I'm the one kind of, I don't have a tribe, and in some ways everybody's going to hate what I have to say. Let me find some common ground with everybody else. When for John to mention, it's absolutely outrageous that the chemical companies and yes, some of the agribusinesses are trying to find this blanket immunity for all pesticides, all chemicals. That's absurd. There should not just be we shouldn't just be saying hey, whatever you do is cool because we like pesticides, even though you can tell to some extent, I do like pesticides, at least the pest killing part of the pesticides. And then when John says, that there are some ways that we can have, we can use fewer pesticides and still have strong yields, and even regenerative agriculture. By the way, I went down to Brazil and I saw some places at the edge of the Amazon where they were using rotational grazing. They were integrating their crops with their livestock. They're using no-till and cover crops. Look, they were also fertilizing their pastures, and they had feedlots in ways that Michael Pollan might not approve of. But they were using a lot of regenerative practices, and they were getting kick-ass yields. And so they were using 1/5 as much of the Amazon. So they were, that's awesome. They're eating less of the earth. I do think, you kind of have to step back to the science. I mean, since we haven't even mentioned this hot button issue, I think Roundup, and glyphosate has become the sort of the bugaboo, the poster child for everything that's wrong with modern agriculture. When, first of all, as Michelle said so eloquently and stole a lot of what I was going to say, is agriculture is not natural. God didn't make agriculture, man did, and it's made a mess since it started. Before the Industrial Revolution, we'd already gotten rid of a South America worth of forest for agriculture. And as you said, today's organic, non-GMO, regeneratively farmed corn looks nothing like the corn that indigenous people farmed. I think we have to get away from this idea that that we're looking for what's natural, because agriculture, if we just left it to nature, we wouldn't be able to feed 10 billion people. Mm-hmm. And as again Michelle pointed out, some of those organic pesticides, they're pretty nasty. They're nasty stuff. So Roundup, which has become the poster child because it's so associated with GMOs. And I know GMOs, boo, bad, even though there's really kind of no evidence of health or environmental impacts, but people feel that it's not natural. They don't want to feed it to their kids. And Roundup, which is so associated with it, Roundup is less toxic than caffeine. It is not one of those chemicals that sits around in the soil forever. It's really it's about as benign as it gets. And there's been a real danger that the kind of hysteria over Roundup is going to lead to it being replaced with much nastier stuff. So which is just a way of like, I'm trying to step back and say, like, I think the food has become so ideological and agriculture has become so ideological where it's kind of this kind of food is bad, this kind of farming is good. When in fact, I think, in science, this is why you have the name of your podcast. I think people have lost a lot of trust in it. And in my book, I talk about some really bad science that's been done on biofuels, on biomass electricity, on basically on agriculture and climate generally. But I think we have to go back and look at least, try to find some facts that we can all agree on so that it's not just, throwing opinions back and forth. And then people should be able to, if you just don't like GMOs because you don't like them, you shouldn't be forced to eat them. And if you don't like fake meat or fake milk, you don't like plant-based milk, you shouldn't be forced to drink them. But also people who want them and who say like, hey, like plant-based meat has 90% fewer emissions. And it's, maybe you care about animals, maybe you don't like antibiotics or you're afraid about pandemics. That should be an option too. So I think the idea should be to sort of maximize options and to maximize facts and science and maybe minimize some of the, the sort of finger pointing and the ideology.
I just want to pivot us to what came out just days ago, the big MAHA strategy report from the MAHA Commission. And as it pertains to pesticides, just in summary, as I'm sure you guys have all read this a couple of times, but it recommended that we communicate better about the robust safety review that the EPA has, that we research more targeted usage of pesticides, which could reduce their use, and that we look at and research more on the cumulative exposure. But it did not recommend any new regulations on pesticides, any crimping the farmer's ability to use them. And I just want to ask everybody just a one-word answer, and then we can dig in as people want. But were you pleased with this as it pertains to pesticides? Disappointed, or truly mixed about it? Like you have mixed feelings. Just one word. John, pleased, disappointed, or mixed?
Mixed.
Aaron?
Mixed. But I thought they towed the line well.
Michelle?
Pleased, mixed, pleased.
And Stephanie?
Pleased.
Okay.
You forgot.
I would have gone with bored.
Bored. Yeah.
They ducked.
That's a good one.
They ducked. Michelle, just briefly, tell us you were pleased.
Farmers are experts. Everybody's trying to tell the farmer how to do their job, and they're not listening to the farmer. If anybody wants to get rid of pesticides, it's us. And we're doing the best we can with the tools in our toolbox that we have today. Someday, maybe we'll look back and say, God, thank God we no longer have to use that Roundup stuff. But at the current moment, it is by far the safest herbicide we have ever had access to. I absolutely echo what Mike just said. I got to tell you, as a family of certified pesticide applicators, we had to carry licenses, training, certifications, constant education. We're not just out there just spraying a bunch of shit that we don't know what we're doing. We know what we're freaking doing. And I'm so sick of people being like, well, you have to stop doing this. And like, when the government has overreach, nobody wins. And so right now, I pleased, because too much government oversight and overreach is never a good thing. And I think that's something most people can agree with. But anyway, so I got to say, like, paraquat, you brought it up earlier. Paraquat's disgusting. Paraquat's nasty. Guess what? You'd be hard pressed to find a farmer that uses it anymore. That stuff was popular in the 70s and the 80s. I don't know anybody that does it. The nasty stuff has been phased out. And yes, when chemistries get banned in certain countries, where did the chemical go? It's got to go somewhere. So it's this import-export of chemistries all around the world. We have stuff that's banned that's allowed in Europe. Europe has stuff that's banned that's allowed here, whatever. It's all mix match, because if you create these formulas, they got to go somewhere. You can't just dump them in the ocean. Or maybe they do. Who friggin' knows? But at the end of the day, what the farmer does is knows the best way to be the best steward of their land. Because yes, we have to produce more food with less land. We have to produce more with fewer inputs. We can't keep spraying pesticides. We're going broke. And so, yeah, like, when people bark up the Roundup glyphosate tree, they're barking up the wrong tree. It's got an LD50 value of 5,600 milligrams per kilogram, affecting the EPSPS enzyme found in plants, not mammals or humans. Meanwhile,
wait, what is all that? That sounds good, but I don't know what any of it means.
So the LD50 value is basically the lethal dose of how many milligrams per kilogram of body weight it would take to affect a human. So that's like kind of a gold standard of how you look at chemistry. And so to Michael's point, yes, it has a lower toxicity level than like a caffeine or, a lot of different things. Meanwhile,
what she's saying is if you want to commit suicide, don't drink Roundup. There are more efficient ways to commit suicide.
That's awful, but it's
that
true.
Is so dark.
That's true, but awful. Yes.
But Michelle, didn't the International Agency for Research on Cancer determine that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans? How do you factor that in?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. You look like you want to take this.
I mean, they did. Funny. I was just on the phone the other day with the guy who spent 28 years at the National Institute for Health and the National Cancer Center, talking about how just what trash that science has been. Basically, it's like they're just exposing these rats to doses that you will never millions of times what humans might get from accidentally ingesting some of the residue in their bread or whatever, and then it's still not clear. They still had to retract a bunch of the studies that found that there might be some kind of impact. It's just, this is where so much of these discussions have gotten away from costs and benefits and hazards and risks, right? Like anything, yes, processed meat is also a probable carcinogen, but you're going to have to eat a lot of it to get into probably land.
John, you said mixed on the MAHA report. I was wondering if you would have been disappointed. It seems pretty tepid on pesticides. Just talk about.
Well, I'm a realist. To make a comparison, some people who are animal rights advocates would like to get rid of all livestock in use. And, I raise cows and I take really good care of my cows, but I can't feed a cow as a pet. So if I don't have, and sheep, if I don't have them to sell for meat, hopefully raised humanely, that's the middle road. And by the way, cows on grass sequester more carbon dioxide than forests. Plenty of science for that. So the argument that, agriculture is bad, I mean, we can see it. That's where the carbon is coming from. It's from tilling. That's where the lands have been desertified in ancient cultures, and we're doing it to ours while draining our aquifers. So not all cows are the same. Not all agriculture is the same. It varies on region and practice. But the reason I gave the answer I did about the report was that I really didn't like that it seemed to praise the EPA's robust system. That's a bureaucracy that I do not trust. And that comes back to Mike's point about, do we trust the science? And people have lost the trust in science. Well, they've lost our trust. And one of the things I would say, Tom, you kind of threw a lob out on the international agency's characterization of glyphosate. I knew that was where that was going to go. What about the U.S. juries? Not farmers versus trial attorneys, but the actual juries who have presented evidence in court, including showing that Syngenta had a lot of its own internal information that paraquat caused Parkinson's and hid it. How do we ever find that out? Well, in the case of glyphosate, a number of juries now have awarded multi-billion-dollar awards against Bayer Monsanto. Not the plaintiff, the juries, our peers. And there's a reason for that. And as a former litigation attorney, it's a high bar to get a punitive award. That's basically saying it does cause harm. Bayer knew it's caused harm, and it did it anyway. The same thing happened with tobacco companies decades ago, the tobacco companies that took over the food industry. So I think the answer with glyphosate is we don't actually know. So to trust the science means we trust the agencies. So like animal rights people, hey, I might want to live in a world with no pesticides, but A, I recognize it's not going to happen overnight like Sri Lanka and other things. We've become dependent on it. We're not going to wean off overnight. And B, it's a political necessity. This is a huge industry, and you would destroy our farmers and whole industries, and even ethanol. We paid them to build ethanol plants. So if you don't like them, we should find a way not to be adversarial, but to incentivize to take them out of commission. There's a middle road. So that's why, I'm a pragmatist, I think, about the report. I just think it praised the EPA a little too much. I wouldn't give them that much credit. I'd like to see these agencies cleaned up a bit, maybe a little more Doge action as well.
Mike, is there
But
something you
less
want?
industry capture. That's all. Sorry, go
Mike,
ahead.
do you want to respond to any of that? The idea
No,
of
don't let him respond. No.
Can I?
He said enough.
well, whoever
I
wants to
think
respond to the
Aaron, let
idea.
I
Aaron
agree. I agree with John. I've said enough.
I just
thank
want
you.
to just on the idea of punitive damages and that's tricky too, John, because like I remember during the opioid epidemic, you have these pharmaceutical companies who are doing these payouts, but if you look on their websites, they don't take blame for anything. They're doing the payouts, but they don't actually admit to any wrongdoing. Michelle, do you want to address that at all or?
Yeah, and I think John brings up a great point. Like the EPA, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, like the oversight, I don't disagree. I mean, there's people don't shocker, people don't trust the government and big corporations, right? But from the farmer's perspective of somebody that's we've been the certified pesticide applicators, like at the end of the day, like the products that we get and the information we have about them, I mean, they come with different warning labels, whether that's caution, warning, skull and crossbones. A lot of these old skull and crossbone products have been phased out with products much safer than Roundup. So at the moment, I would say that it is still the safest. And by the way, herbicides are pesticides. People always say herbicides and pesticides. It's actually the same thing. Herbicides are pesticides. So anyway, but Roundup is by far the safest one we've ever had access to, which is why it's so popular. Now, obviously, I have vested interest in keeping these chemistries as safe as possible because my loved ones are the ones spraying them, right? So like we're the ones around it. Like, so if that's my family, like I love that more than anybody else. And so coming back to why should I trust you? I guess this podcast, like, yeah, I mean, the government and the corporations, as farmers, we're doing the best we can, but we're barking up the wrong tree. I mean, there's things out there that are far worse that aren't getting talked about. But to the point of a jury and corporations being sued, it's really easy to put Monsanto with a target on its back. I mean, put that to a jury, and everybody's going to say, of course it's guilty, pay it out. Meanwhile, the farmers are kind of like, I don't know. I mean, they did the agricultural health study, which is people like us as farmers using the products, and there wasn't credible evidence that it's a probable carcinogen. It's a possible carcinogen along with everything else in our lives. Like look at California Prop 65, I think it is, that has, what is it? Fishing poles might cause cancer, parking lots, like all sorts of crazy stuff. Coffee, caffeine. I mean, try suing Starbucks and people will be like, over my dead body, but try suing Monsanto and people will be like, yeah, that one's all right. It's like, it's how easy can you persuade a jury? And that's a real easy one to get money from.
Michelle, are you for Section 453, which would offer those legal protections to pesticide makers?
I don't think I know enough about it to give you an educated answer.
Understood. Yeah, no, of course. Just other folks that feel aligned with MAHA, if Republicans vote for that, for legal protections for pesticide makers, would that be enough to jar you loose of support of Republicans and perhaps look at Democrats? Or are there too many other things where Republicans have been an ally of MAHA that you would be able to absorb that and still support Republicans? John, what do you make of that?
I'm in a situation where a lot of Democrats support some of the policies we want to make America healthier, but they don't want anything to do with the MAHA acronym. And some Republicans love the MAHA acronym, but they don't want to vote on any of the policies that would deliver on it. If we don't deliver on it, Republicans deserve to lose the midterms. I, for one, would be very discouraged, and I think it would be throwing away an opportunity. But that's why I'm trying to find bipartisan, that's why I was in Congress last week and I'm down in D.C. now, trying to find that bipartisan path where we can not be deadlocked. And if we can't come together as a nation on our food supply with mutual respect and supporting our farmers, then we're doomed anyway on everything else. And we'll never agree on vaccines or immigration or transgenderism or anything else. So that's why I think this is the tip of the spear. So I will be there. And I can tell you that I was impressed with many Republican legislators who do not appear to support. I think it's going to die. But the very effort, because again, remember, and I appreciate Michelle, not having looked at it, but it's not just protecting pesticides, which do include herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, all the rest. It's all chemicals and even the paraquat. So that's where I think it's extreme and overbroad and disrupts that balance. And I won't defend the juries other than you need to have evidence for a court to present to a jury. So it's, I think my question there, by the way, is not relying on international standards, but do we want to have full testing? And the juries are part of that. Juries are telling us, and 181,000 plaintiffs are telling us that they got lymphoma from that chemical, probably mostly in residential uses, which they have now eliminated glyphosate in residential Roundup. So hopefully that'll go away. But my point is that I think we need further study, and not just whether glyphosate is a toxin to our bodies like caffeine, but whether it's a toxin to the microbes in our soils and in our animal livestock and in our bodies, which we're directly linked to. That's what the soil science and gut science is showing us. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you for that, John. I know we lose Stephanie in just a minute or two. So Stephanie, Farmer Stephanie, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, just real quick. I've been advocating a long time, and I'm a younger advocate that is going to take over the dairy farm one day. And so just seeing a lot of opinions, being in the dairy industry, we've been attacked by the activists for many years. We've been attacked by rumors about our industry, how we milk cows forever, how we just pump antibiotics and hormones into animals, and how your food is bad. And so, the biggest thing, going back to when Michael said people have options, I say that on my tours all the time. If you want to buy a certain label because you're comfortable with it, that is totally up to you. But I am here to educate you properly off my practices and what I love and how I take care of my animals. And you can either take it or leave it. I do believe there's protection needed within agriculture, and there needs to be a separation of what is made here and what is produced here, because I think there is a big difference. And that's what I said in the beginning of, I am not for fake meat and fake milk. If they want to produce it, great. If people believe in that because they don't want to kill animals, great. But it should not be part of our industry. I also do believe that marketing has put us against each other, and other producers online have put us against each other. And I think I really respect this conversation. I respect all of you guys, because I am out here just trying to educate the consumers. I talk to consumers across the world all the time. I leave out the CEOs. I leave out the big companies. I want to know what the consumers are thinking, what they want, because at the end of the day, that's who we're selling to. And so I think we can all come together and love agriculture and respect each other's differences and practices, and also regulations and weather and whatever we face in that state and that environment that we are farming in. And that's a big thing with me, is I just want people to know how loved and how cherished agriculture is. And it's not going to be around here forever. 360 million acres is up for grabs of farmers that are 70 plus. So we do have to start thinking about where that land and water resources are going to go. We have to start being advocates for the next generation the best that we can. So when it comes to MAHA, when it comes to left or right, I think we have got it all wrong there. We all need to be on one common ground and one love, and that is agriculture.
Boy,
Amen.
Stephanie.
Amazing. Mic drop, Stephanie.
I feel like we need to end it. No, but I know, and I will say that you guys have each other's emails. I did put you on there, and I would really love if you continued to engage each other in conversation in any way that we can facilitate that. Aaron Martin, please. And Stephanie, if you have to go, that's totally fine.
Okay.
Thank you
Bye,
for
guys.
that.
I think this goes to the point of, this is not a consumer problem. This is not a farmer problem. This is a systemic problem. And we need to be focusing on supporting farmers, not blaming farmers. And really, I think the best thing that people can do is buy from a farmer. Get to know your farmer. Talk directly to a farmer.
Yeah.
People want to complain about the markets and what's available and what they can trust and not trust. But I guarantee if you go have a relationship with your local farmer, you can know what's going on and know a lot more facts about what's going on. And so I say to those people want to sit around and bitch about things so much, but they don't want to do anything about it. And the best thing you could do is vote with your dollars, buy directly from a farmer, get to know a farmer, and support them, because the farmers need so much support. And we should not be having farmers internalize external costs. That is not their fault. And we should be supporting them. We should not protect chemical companies. That would be a big mistake. I'm still going to believe in MAHA, but there is It's really unfortunate that there's a party line differentiation federally on that. I think a lot of Democrats can't believe that they would agree or vice versa with Republicans. They actually, I think really most of them all agree on this issue. They're just voting no because the other party's voting yes. Luckily in Oklahoma, we prevented that pesticide immunity bill from even being heard on the floor. But it was interesting. The same author who authored that bill authored our Food as Medicine Act, which is just very interesting. But, everyone's taking money on either side of the aisle from big corporate, big pharma, big ag. It's all happening. And I think we need to know that, and legislators need to vote for the people and not for those companies. But we've created a whole problem with that.
Big grocery. Big grocery.
Yeah, big grocery. Yeah, exactly. Even the food as medicine movement's very infiltrated by big ag, and they actually call themselves big broccoli. And I was like, what is that? I've never heard of that. But anyway, I think just back to Stephanie's point and everybody's point is we need to be together on this. And I always like to say it's not a blue or a red team. It's an American team. And we all need to be on that team and be supporting farmers. And we all don't have to be on the same page. There's always truth in the middle. And having these healthy conversations. Brinda, thanks for holding space for us to have these difficult conversations. I appreciate it.
I'm so grateful to all of you for joining us today. I want to give a big thank you to Mike Grunwald, Farmer Michelle Miller, Aaron Martin, Farmer John Clark, and Farmer Stephanie Nash for joining us on the pod today. This is the Why Should I Trust You podcast. I'm Brinda Adhikari. He's Tom Johnson. She's Dr. Maggie Bartlett. Please send us questions, comments to whyshoulditrustyou.net, and we will see you right back here on Thursday.